So let's begin, and let me kick off. Okay. So as you all know, I'm John Henry, Chairman of the Committee for the Republic. For more than a century, the pursuit of empire has shredded our national birth certificate, the United States Constitution. The mission of the Committee for the Republic is to restore observance of the Constitution. Now, there are two Americas: the America of James Madison, which governs through separation of powers and safeguards our civil liberties, and the America of Woodrow Wilson, which governs through concentration of power in the hands of the president and undermines our liberties. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are Madison's gift to the nation, to political science, what Michelangelo's David is to sculpture. In my opinion, separation of powers is the most important idea in political history. The American Constitution stands alone in its myriad forms of separation of powers. Our exceptionalism isn't our guns, it's our Constitution. Because emergencies endanger the rule of law, Madison separated the power to go to war from the power to wage war. The crown jewel of separation of powers is the Constitution's exclusive entrustment of the war power to Congress. War is the serpent tempting the president with limitless power. Let's be clear. Today's presidents claim the power to be prosecutor, judge, jury, executioner, to kill any person on the planet on his say-so alone. Now, nourished by Madison's constitutional genius, we grew in our first century into the world's largest economy. In another century, we made progress redressing the injustices committed against African Americans, Japanese Americans, Native Americans, women, and gays. In the Spanish-American War and World War I, we took a fatal turn, abandoning liberty for the Wilsonian ambition to tell the world what to do. Military power became our instrument as God's new chosen people. We traded the prosperity that comes from marching to our own drummer for the bankruptcy of endless war. The Democratic and Republican parties are joint venture partners in creating our constitutional crisis. They've spent the last century putting their party above the institutional interests of Congress. To grasp just how deep our constitutional crisis is, I give you the committee's Vice Chairman, Bruce Fein. Bruce will explain the specific steps required for Congress to regain the 18 enumerated powers that once made it the greatest legislature in the history of the world. Bruce, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, John. Let me first express my gratitude to Max Moore. He's the digital genius behind all these Zooms. I think John and I are still on the Heidelberg or Neanderthal man stage, so it couldn't happen without Max. I'm sure he gets frustrated from time to time. The second compliment I'd like to make is to John himself. He performs yeoman service. Many of these things are really joyless, cheerless tasks, but he undertakes them faithfully, month after month, week after week, and he certainly deserves a very strong voice of gratitude. But those are introductory remarks. I want to make clear we've got to put everything in perspective. Those who are generous with their time, unsparing in their kindness, deserve applause. Now let me get into the topic for tonight about the Constitution. I think that we need to begin by understanding the spirit as well as the letter. Remember, St. Paul said, the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. The Constitution was unique for two reasons. One, as Madison explained in Federalist 47, it was not based upon the idea that if we got a kind, benevolent, just ruler, could be George Washington, then we could trust them to protect our liberties and freedoms. It was based on the assumption of human nature being made of crooked timber. And unless ambition was made to counter ambition in some institutional sense, we would all fall to the despotism that all previous empires or republics had fallen, because power naturally gravitates to the executive branch. The human species craves certainty, simplicity. Give me the rules, I'll get to heaven. I don't want to think for myself. That is not the theory, the spirit behind the Constitution. The Constitution is based upon the idea that sovereignty lies in the people, that the opportunity of each person to march to their own drummer, limited by laws when necessary to protect against predation, foreign aggression, is the earmark of a great civilization. The government and no individual is so saintly to direct another person as to how to find their fulfillment. So our liberty, our glory was liberty, not domination and fighting wars every other year, trying to claim that we're the chosen people, fated to tell other people how to live. The white man's burden, if you will. Go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, kill them, leave wrecks in wilderness, and then come back home and say how powerful we are. So that's unique. That's the spirit of the Constitution. That's why securing and maintaining and following separation of powers is so important, because that's the remedy for depending upon the happenstance of the personality of someone who happens to occupy office. Now, in the separation of powers scheme, the most important is the war power that is entrusted to Congress exclusively, as James Madison explained in his Alphidius Papers exchanges with Alexander Hamilton. Now, why is the war power so important? Why does the committee focus on it? It's because a nation at war is a nation that's lawless. War is legalized first-degree murder. The courts automatically defer to the political branches in times of warfare. You get the Japanese, I would call the odious detention camps, at least they weren't extermination camps, upheld by a unanimous Supreme Court in the Hirabayashi case. And war also slashes, crumbles liberty. Your right to privacy is out the window. You get surveillance. You don't have any due process with regard to trials. Oftentimes the habeas corpus may be suspended even by the president, sometimes illegally. So there's no civilian trial. It bows to military supremacy. That's why in wartime, the basic constitutional structures basically crumble. And that's why the framers were unified in believing from Hamilton to Madison that perpetual warfare is the death knell of liberty. You simply can't have war in its urgencies and the kind of due process and deliberative institutional review and fight a war. You need a Caesar to win, unified command. So where are we on the war power? First, one thing that's unique about it is that its meaning is perhaps clearer than any other provision in the Constitution, but for the minimum age to be president, 35. The framers of the Constitution and those who participated in debating it were universal in agreeing only Congress could take us from a state of war, a state of peace to a state of war. That the president could not be trusted with a war power because it is the nurse of executive aggrandizement. He'd be tempted to concoct excuses for war, which was done throughout the regimes of British kings. And therefore only Congress, both the House and the Senate, would need to pass a statute authorizing moving us from a state of peace to war in order for us to cross that threshold. And of course, that's what George Washington said in his first administration. It's what Thomas Jefferson said during the Barbary Pirate War. James Madison made clear when he went to Congress to get a declaration for the War of 1812, the decision was up to Congress, not to him. He, of course, being the drafter of the Declared War Clause, is perhaps an authoritative expounder of what it means. So there can be no serious debate about what the intent and meaning of the War Clause is. That does not mean that the framers believed it or any other provision of the Constitution should be frozen in time like a petrified forest. The amendment process under Article 5 is available. And of course, it was used in the very first Congress to ratify the Bill of Rights through proposed amendments by Congress, ratified by 3/4 of the states. That's how you could keep the Constitution, so to speak, up to date. Through the amendment process, deliberative. Sometimes it's arduous, but not always. The 18-year-old Voting Rights Amendment was ratified in only 13 weeks. But those who say, well, the framers couldn't anticipate the changes in geographical or other technological circumstances when they drafted the Declare War Clause, therefore we can change it unilaterally, misconceive the nature of constitutional change. The amendment process is what you utilize if you think the Constitution has become obsolete in some way. And that's what, in part, we ratified an income tax amendment, changed the way in which we elected senators, the Civil War amendments. But someone just can't stand up and say, well, I don't like the clause anymore, I'm going to change it on my own. That's a definition of a despot. So that is what the War Clause clearly means and how it was executed for the first 100 years. Even though on occasion it was abused by presidents who lied openly and notoriously to get Congress to believe we had been attacked and to declare war. That's what James K. Polk did in 1846 to get us in the Mexican-American War, and led to Abraham Lincoln's spot resolutions that Polk refused to respond to. The spot resolution asked Polk to explain on what spot on American soil did an American soldier die from a Mexican soldier's bullet. And indeed, because of the lies, the House of Representatives did in 1848 pass a bill that declared the war unconstitutional. Daniel Webster in the Senate wanted Polk to be impeached. It didn't happen. The war concluded shortly thereafter in 1848, and things moved forward. Politicians usually do not think of the power of precedent to cause evils to reoccur. But anyway, we did stick generally to the purpose and intent of the Declare War Clause for the first 100 years. And then the clamor for empire. I would put it maybe more dramatically than John. I think we made a Faustian bargain around the 1900s and said, no, we're powerful enough now. We produce more steel in Great Britain. We can clearly be the new chosen people. That's the words of Senator Albert Jenner from Indiana, explaining why we should stay in the Philippines forever, even if it meant waterboarding, massacres. But we were bringing civilization everywhere because we were made of angels, and we should embrace with enthusiasm our carrying the American way of life everywhere in the world. That was the Faustian bargain. We decided we would surrender liberty as our glory for power and domination. And since the Mexican-American War, the Declare War Clause has been utilized on a couple of occasions, but substantially because presidents lied. In the Spanish-American War, McKinley was lying about the blowing up of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, blaming it on the Spanish government. Hyman Rickover, our famous admiral, examined the facts, years later and said, no, it was internal combustion in Maine that caused the explosion. And then McKinley went on and ran the war. It wasn't just against Spain and Cuba, but carried the war into the Philippines and Guam, all the possessions of Spain, stayed there afterwards. And that began, those were the beginnings of the American Empire. Woodrow Wilson lied about the Lusitania that was sunk by the Germans. It was carrying munitions that made it a legitimate target of war. And he was stating that we were attacked by the Germans, even though the number of American civilians who died prior to the declaration of war, you count on your hands with fingers left. We had already been at war because Germany was abusing submarine warfare when that was a misstatement of the facts. And certainly he never retracted his lie about the Lusitania. We did declare war for the very last time in the battles of World War II. That's clearly an indication Japan did attack. And Roosevelt said, well, we've been attacked. We're already in a state of war. We don't have to change from peace to war. The Japanese have already thrust that upon us. But since that time, we have never had Congress declare war. The Korean War, perhaps the most dramatic example, Harry Truman called it a police action. Tens of thousands of Americans died. Even MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons against China. 3, 4, 5 million Chinese entered the war. We're still technically at war with North Korea today, but there was never any congressional vote to go to war on that score. And that has continued throughout the history since some 70 years. There are occasions when Congress has voted political support for the president or given its delegated authority to the president. Well, you decide if you want to go to war. That's for example, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. It wasn't a declaration of war. It says, Lyndon Johnson, you can use whatever military force you want to solve all the problems in Southeast Asia. When Congress revoked the Gulf of Tonkin resolution under President Nixon, Nixon said, well, so what? I'm just using Article 2 power to continue the war, which he did for several more years. And the reason why the war power cannot be delegated is because the whole purpose of the separation is to ensure that the decision to go from peace to war is made by those who don't have the temptation, like the executive, to concoct excuses. There's certain powers that Congress cannot give away, even if it wants to. And that's one of the decisions of the US Supreme Court in the line item veto case called Clinton versus New York in 1998. And there's certainly nothing in the text of the Constitution that suggests that Congress can give away all of its powers, because it destroys the whole idea of why we have separation in the first instance. So we now have come to a circumstance where the declare war clause means and is implemented the opposite of what its clear original intent was. Namely, presidents go to war, they use the military offensively anytime they want. They may consult with Congress from time to time, but it's simply a matter of choice, a political calculation, not because they feel any obligation whatsoever. I found it striking, for instance, in President Obama's presidential memoir. The word Constitution makes an appearance in like 800 pages once. And it's mentioned very fleetingly in disparaging the Republicans for suggesting under the Constitution he needed some kind of congressional authority to fight the war in Libya. But other than that, it is bereft of a single reference to the Constitution. He has page after page discussing how we ought to conduct warfare in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. Never does either Obama or any of his assistants, Gates or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, ever even mention, well, what does the Constitution require us to do here? Congress is an afterthought. And I'm not suggesting that this is at all unique to President Obama. All presidents have that mindset since Harry Truman. Why are we going to Congress? We can do this unilaterally. Even if Congress turned us down, we'll do it unilaterally. They're just a bother. And I say, what makes this disturbing for someone who cares about the Constitution and the rule of law? If you can flout a provision of the war clause, which is so clear, can you pick and choose any clause that you want to flout? Why is the war clause the only one you can violate? What about the First Amendment? What about the Second Amendment? What about due process? What about the appointments clause? Can you decide to dissolve Congress? You just pick and choose what parts you want to enforce and what parts you don't. And that's what makes, I think, so worrisome, the fact that we have let the declare war clause to be turned on its head. It's a homonym of what it was enacted to be. Sounds the same, but means basically the opposite. Now, how do we recapture the declare war clause to really have it exercised by Congress? Now, I'm not Pollyannish in believing that we can convert, certainly the current members, who are largely there because of donations. Most of them, I don't believe, are serious people. I spend a whole lot of time up there, and it's really quite frustrating. They really don't want to hear real arguments. Is it politically useful or not useful? And that's why a party, depending upon who's in the presidency, will complain a little bit. Congress hasn't been consulted about a war, but then they'll say the opposite as soon as the president of the opposite political stripe is in office. The war power will be recaptured only if you, the American people, exercise their sovereignty and say, listen, not only is this so damaging to liberty in the Constitution, the war power also leads to a gross distortion of the budget. even though oftentimes it's not seen directly. Because we are in perpetual presidential wars, perhaps the vast majority of all discretionary spending is national security, and it's scattered among the agencies. It isn't just the Defense Department, 200, 750, 800 billion dollars a year, which is often focused on. National security spending needs to include the Veterans Administration, the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Energy houses our nuclear program, which you know is undergoing a $1 trillion plus upgrade, so we can blow up the world 5,000 times instead of only a few times. And it includes also the interest on the national debt that has been incurred in order to fight wars, because we don't want to tax the citizens in order to undertake what I consider fool's errands or worse. So that's the predicament we're in. How, since separation of powers requires an institution to defend itself, how can we get Congress to do the right thing? We've spent some time, the committee has, trying to recruit, excuse me, candidates. Excuse me, I need to take a smoke of water here. Thank you. Candidates to run for office by making the declare war clause, a bread and butter issue, by saying if you don't have bridges and your roads are in disrepair, you don't have hospitals, your education system is crumbling, that's because we're at war permanently. And all this money is going to Northrop Grumman and to Boeing and to Lockheed Martin and whatever. But you have to understand all the connections in order to make the argument persuasively, because in the mainstream media and in the Congress itself, Democrats and Republicans, they never discuss this. It's just a unified understanding. This is how it is. The military industrial complex, multi-trillion dollar, is going to persist, and it runs things. And I say, go, if you want the clearest proof, I believe, read, even though it's 800 pages, President Obama's memoir. These issues that I've just raised here are never discussed in one sentence. And he's going over the waterfront of all these wars and where we're going to pay for X, Y, Z. He never says, well, this is ridiculous. Why are we fighting these wars anyway? And Congress has to authorize them. And that shows you how the Constitution has really disappeared as a source of debate, of colloquy. And it's not taught in the schools either. Just another example. When a president of the United States says openly and never retracted it, and then I have Article 2 where I have the right to do anything I want as president, most people would read that and say, oh, that person thinks he's a monarch. He can do anything he wants as president. Statements like that are made. The press they cover it, and it's a one-day story, and it goes away. It's not even an issue in presidential debates. No one says anything about it. And yet that's about as clear and present danger you can get to separation of powers and the rule of law that's imaginable. This is not a slip of the tongue. Remember President Nixon Frost. When the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Oh, really? That's kind of what you would expect at the time of the American Revolution and King George III, saying, well, if Parliament enacts it or I approve it, it's not illegal. So that's just a slight tip of the iceberg of how far the Constitution has disappeared from our lexicon and from governing really our freedom. That's not to say that we are in the same state of affairs as those who reside in China or Russia. No, we do have, not legal or constitutional, there's still political constraints on how much abuse the power of the president can go before the political retaliation would be invited and stopped short quite of Tiananmen Square or poisoning Alexander Navalny or something like that. But still, that's contrary to our whole idea of a constitution, which is to not depend upon personalities, but institutions to secure our freedom and liberty. Because we never know when a Caligula, some things we already had a Caligula or others will enter the White House. And how are they going to use their power? We don't want to do that. And it's also just a matter of human dignity. Self-government says, no, other people don't get to tell me how to live. We govern ourselves, and we have a right to chart our own destiny, as long as it's not antisocial and we're not shooting other people and engaged in predatory conduct. And that's really the lifeblood of the American Republic and how it was conceived. Now, I know I've spent a lot of time on the war power because I think it's so important, but I want to invite questions because you can hold an audience so long and I don't want to bore everyone to death. But let me just recite some of the other provisions that are quite clear and regularly flouted with impunity. A treaty under the Constitution is an agreement between one or more nations. And now we don't have treaties anymore. The agreement, the Paris peace, climate change, that wasn't a treaty. That was never ratified by the Senate. The agreement with Iran was never ratified by the Senate. Indeed, then Secretary of State John Kerry said, well, the reason why we're going to say it's not a treaty because we think the Senate might not ratify it. I mean, the last time the treaty power was really defended was in the League of Nations, where Henry Cabot Lodge told Wilson, you're not going to get that treaty because you've given the war power away in the treaty, and you can't do that. That's why when the United Nations was established, the treaty provision clearly stated you couldn't use the armed forces offensively without a congressional declaration of war or approval, a reservation that Harry Truman immediately flouted in Korea. So we have also the treaty clause is basically no longer operative. Then we have the president's the power to spend. Now presidents will spend on their own, whether Congress appropriates the money or not, or will spend it for something different, even though the Constitution specifically says in the appropriations clause, no money can be spent, unless it's according to an appropriation bill passed by Congress. President can't just decide, well, you gave me 80 billion for FEMA, but I'll use it for unemployment insurance or something like that. He can do that if he gets the statute to change, but he can't do that unilaterally. Another provision with regard to oversight, it's very clear that the Congress of the United States inherited the basic parliamentary powers that were enjoyed in Great Britain. And it used to be, when I was young, a president like Richard Nixon was impeached by the House Judiciary Committee, in part because he flouted a congressional subpoena. It didn't matter whether he wanted to invoke state secrets or executive privilege. You can obviously ask the Congress to hold certain documents in executive session if they're very sensitive. We don't want to reveal the location of our troops. And Congress does a better job at keeping secrets than the executive anyway. But since then, the presidents of all stripes flout literally hundreds of congressional subpoenas. They don't want to show up. And the fact is we end up with secret government, which becomes especially terrifying in the age of cyber, where a president could easily say without any oversight, oh, we've got a cyber attack on our military installations and it emanated from somewhere, China, Russia, someplace. He doesn't tell you where, he doesn't explain, and he doesn't put any evidence out, like John Kennedy or Adlai Stevenson about the rockets in Cuba, and says, and therefore I'm going to go to war on my own. And without oversight, it's very difficult to have self-government. We need to know what our government is doing in order to decide whether we approve it or not. And that's basically been jettisoned. And Congress doesn't go, Congress has inherent power. Up until the 1930s, it used to imprison members of the executive branch or private parties who flouted subpoenas. They actually had a detention center in Congress. And those who claimed they were improperly detained had to bring habeas corpus suits. But since then, Congress doesn't enforce. They don't go inherent contempt. They will go to court from time to time, wait 5 years. The issue becomes irrelevant. Whenever Congress expires, the term of Congress expires, all the subpoenas expire, so you go back to square one. So going the court route is clearly an earmark of surrender. They don't want to take responsibility for actually asserting their own power and having their constituents then decide was that the right thing to do or not. So the oversight power is gone. And then we have the appointments power. It's quite clear that the Constitution in Article 2 says principal officers of the United States, those who exercise significant power to enforce the law, have to be confirmed by the Senate. And presidents all the time now, they'll appoint acting this and acting that secretaries, never get confirmed whatsoever. On some occasions, we have people who are very, very powerful, more powerful than cabinet, who don't get confirmed. For example, the National Security Advisor. Henry Kissinger was far more powerful in making our foreign policy than William Rogers, who was Secretary of State. But he was not confirmed by the Senate. He never went up for oversight hearings because the tradition is you only have oversight of people who are confirmed by the Senate. So they would talk to William Rogers, who didn't even know Kissinger was traveling to China to open up relations with Mao Zedong. And Congress acquiesces in that kind of thing. We don't have, with the White House counsel, I think Boyden Gray, one of our wonderful founding members, could probably testify, yeah, White House counsel oftentimes exercises power greater than the Attorney General if they're very close to the president. The White House counsel is not confirmed. There's no Senate requirement and shielded from general oversight. Now, maybe that will change. Donald McGahn, the White House counsel, looks like in executive session, he'll be saying some things, whatever he says with regard to the Mueller report, we don't know. But Congress has not asserted its authority to have true oversight. An example of why it makes a difference. You may recall that it was appointed he was nominated as UN ambassador by George W. Bush, John Bolton. And he went through confirmation hearings and they voted him down. So he served as acting UN ambassador, never real UN ambassador. But then he comes back and he serves as national security advisor and he didn't have any oversight hearings whatsoever. He just went in, and there's something strange about that. So we have very, very upside down understanding and application of the appointments power. There are lesser violations of the Constitution, but one important one that I've omitted is, I believe, a total misunderstanding of the impeachment clause. That is, we provided, as Benjamin Franklin said, a substitute for tyrannicide, namely a civilized process by which you could decide an incumbent was an untrustworthy steward of our liberties. And you didn't send them to Siberia or have any criminal punishment. You said you just have to leave office. And that was by committing treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. George Mason, who was at the Constitution Convention, explained attempts to subvert the Constitution would be high crimes and misdemeanors. Impeachment was intended to be prophylactic, to oust somebody before they created chaos and anarchy rather than afterwards. And in my judgment, even though there were 2 impeachments against Mr. Trump, they really were not faithful in many respects to the kinds of violations of the Constitution that should warrant removal from office. And it's very, very regrettable that I believe that they were mishandled. But it should not be viewed as, like many have made it seem, a coup d'etat if you have impeachment. No, that's not a coup d'etat, especially in the way in which the modern political parties have developed. The vice president takes over from the president. You don't have a change in party control. And so there's a diminished incentive to wield impeachment for simply political purposes. And that should make it less dicey for impeachment to begin, but it has to be real high crimes and misdemeanors, subversions of the Constitution, not you don't like his policy. That clearly is a bridge too far. Anyway, the last thing I will relate to, because I know it's very prominent and it's been around for a long time, is outside the national security area, Congress in the domestic area just delegates all the policy making to the executive branch. They give standards that are like 80,000 degrees of generality, promulgate regulations in the national interest or promulgate national emergencies when you think we're in danger. There's standardless discretion. And so when you hear this word, we have gridlock, there's really not gridlock if Congress doesn't agree. It just means the executive branch is doing the same thing through rulemaking. You can consider, for example, Barack Obama initially, he wanted legislation to protect the DACA children from deportation. He proposed it. Congress didn't at least immediately enact it. So he said, okay, I'll just issue a presidential memorandum and do the same thing. As I say, I don't want to suggest at all that this is a partisan issue. Both parties do it with equal eagerness and with equal disdain for the Constitution. But the delegation problem is huge because the bureaucrats oftentimes are gearing themselves to go serve the industries that they regulate, a revolving door, one way and back, and they're not accountable. The hearings are not like the congressional hearings where there's oversight and real expertise. So many deals are cut in the back room, and agency capture is notorious. I think Boyden's probably the expert of the world on that score. It's another example that arose because an empire just needs to have a huge government. And when you have checks and balances, you can't get things passed in Congress. And the only way you can grow the government is to delegate it to the executive, because there really aren't any internal checks in the executive. Everybody responds to the president. And that's why whether you have Reagan saying we're going to diminish the state, or Grover Norquist saying we're going to make the federal government small enough you can wash it down a bathtub, these are just lunatic statements. Under conservative and liberal presidents, the government grows bigger every single year, borrows more and more money. It never diminishes, certainly not across the board. In some particular areas it may. So that's the presentation, and I don't have enough time really to go into how it's going to be remedied by the citizens, and really making sustained effort to recruit candidates before they get corrupted into Congress to run on a constitutional platform and say, it's my duty. If I err, you can throw me out of office, but I'm not surrendering my power to the executive branch. And the last thing I say, you can't see it readily, like you can see space or an unclouded day. But it is the flouting of the Constitution regularly, the war power, the appropriations power treaty, that is causing all these other secondary and tertiary ills that we find domestically that create, the 1% profiting and the 99% struggling in misery. But let me conclude there, and I apologize if I went too long, and John, you moderate the questions however you want.
Okay, well, I see Paul Horn on our board has a question about the war power. Paul, do you want me to read it, or do you want to ask it yourself?
You probably read better than I do, John. Go ahead.
Okay, how do you explain Congress' passivity in the exercise of its war power for such a long time? Might it be explained by the myriad conflicting vested interests of members of Congress?
Well, I think that the members of Congress view voting on war as highly risky politically, because war is very uncertain. And because we now have members who look at politics as a profession, not you serve and then leave, which was true at the founding, they don't want to vote on the war power. I think I can recount, I think John, you and Ann were at this debate I had with John Yu at the National Defense University. And he explained when the administration drafted the Iraqi war resolution, the members of Congress were openly angry. Why are you making us vote on this? We don't want to vote on it, just leave us alone. And it's exactly, that's the reason why I think Madison insisted you can't delegate this. It is a risky proposition, which is why it's serious, and we want the Congress to have to make the decision. But they view it as, well, if I don't vote and the war goes south, I'll just blame it on the president. And if it seems to work, well, I'm not going to get primaried because nothing bad happened. And that.
John, could I ask a follow-up question?
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Is there some way under the Constitution to compel Congress to act on certain issues? For instance, I'm thinking of the war powers, but I'm also thinking of the last president's contempt for subpoenas and requests for documents. I mean, the two of them seem to be Congress just sort of washing its hands of its responsibility. Is there no way to compel Congress to act?
Well, the difficulty we have, Paul, is that you could try the judicial branch, but the court has this doctrine, a single member, because I think Walter Jones was kind of the last one, is so-called denied standing to complain that the other members are not doing their duty. I spent hours and hours with Walter because he wanted to sue John Boehner, because Boehner would never let him vote. He says, Mr. Boehner, you are forbidding me from exercising my constitutional responsibilities. That's a violation. He wanted to sue him. We ultimately decided that we had a motion to vacate, and he left. He didn't wait for the motion, but it wasn't as clear cut as you're putting it, as what Walter wanted to do. But as I say, that the courts are very, very bad on entertaining any what you call internal congressional inactivity or nonfeasance. And that's why, unless the citizens threaten them, you're going to lose office. We need to have you make that decision. And if you make it wrong, we'll go after you. That's why you're there. The other mechanisms simply, are not adequate to the task.
Mary Holland, I see you have a question. If you unmute yourself, why don't you ask it? It's about the
Right. So my question relates to sort of not the war context, but the sort of health state of emergency that we've been in for more than a year, as have most countries around the world. And do you see this as analogous to war? And do you see the executive power in emergencies as similarly dangerous? And we're seeing that not only at the federal level, but also with respect to governors' powers in states continuing.
Oh yes. Because in part, Mary, it's because these national emergencies that the Congress has recognized, the National Emergencies Act, there are no standards. You can make up anything. That's how Trump claimed, well, there's an emergency on the border. This is after Congress refused to, border of Mexico refused to fund the money that he wanted to build the wall. So he just took, $6-7 billion out of military construction and said, okay, well, we'll build the wall with it. Now, instead of, he's certainly entitled to ask for the appropriations. But yeah, claiming these national emergencies, again, that are without any standards at all. And they claim national emergencies. That's why we're probably being surveilled right now by the National Security Agency. Oh, we're in a state of war, national emergency, no more warrants. This is something to keep us safe. So the Fourth Amendment goes out the window. So yes, the national emergencies is not limited at all to the foreign or national security area. It bleeds over, which is, again, another example of the abdication of Congress.
Good. So, Bruce, let me ask you a question here while waiting for others. Do you think our constitutional crisis is the most important crisis facing our country?
Yes, I do. Because if we don't solve it, I do not believe with the absence of separation of powers that we'll ever get back on course, that we will spend ourselves into bankruptcy. We're almost there. The endless wars continue and will ultimately collapse from overreach. It's clearly not something that's going to cure itself. Whether Republicans or Democrats are in office, every presidency becomes worse than the previous presidency. And it doesn't matter what they say or campaign on. Once they're there, they do everything their predecessor did and takes it a step further. The difficulty, I believe, in trying to underscore the importance of the issue, John, is that the evidence is not ocular. I mean, we're not seeing people die in the street immediately. It's more incremental, if you will. The power gravitates toward the president, inch by inch, every single day. And at one point, it will all happen, I think, very rapidly, and the empire will collapse, like the Soviet empire collapsed almost instantly as well. And because we're talking about institutions and not personalities, it's difficult to get a grasp of how important these ideas and concepts are. I mean, I am frightened when I hear the members of Congress and the president say, yeah, if I think it's a national emergency, I can kill anybody I want. I'll invoke state secrets. I'll invoke executive privilege. No one will know why I disappeared somebody. Really? I'm worried now. Even if I don't think you'll do that tomorrow, you're claiming that power. And that power has persisted in presidents now for well over 2 decades, and there's no indication any president's going to surrender it. That, to me, is truly frightening.
All right. So put it differently, I mean, the two parties basically compete on policy, but they don't, they really don't compete on process.
No.
And why do you think, and when did you first reach the conclusion that process was much more important than policy, than any particular policy?
At least 20 years ago, and I started writing regularly about this. And I think that the reason that the members think that, I think their intellectual universe is political, and they think about what will help my party remain in power. They no longer defend institutions, and part of that is because the parties are the foremost loyalty of the member than it was at the outset. And the Constitution is not, even though the only oath that they take to support is the Constitution of the United States. And they are, they're risk averse. They're always asking, it's like a curse word. Well, we'll primary you, like it's somehow a danger that somebody will run against you for office. Well, that's the electoral process at work. I mean, if those statements were made in Russia or China, we'd say, that shows these people don't believe in freedom. What's wrong with a primary? Yes, you just go out and campaign. And people have a right to run for office, comply with whatever is needed to get on the ballot, go campaign. But I think it's that fixation on just getting reelected and nothing more. And that doesn't have anything to do with the process. They will change from one day to the next, whatever process seems to work in their political favor.
Right. We've got Ted Postal. Ted, I think you're out in California. Ted has done a lot of work on these different chemical attacks. Ted, I think there was one under Obama and two under Trump. Is that right? There were. And
Yeah, I
you
think
studied them all.
I'm sort of at a loss. So I think, I find myself deeply sympathetic and in support of Bruce's concerns and arguments. But I don't see that the electorate, and I include many people who consider themselves progressives, standing up and showing concerns about the political situation. And, for example, even though I've really done the only technically accurate work on these attacks in the Middle East, and this is not a grandstanding, it's just I'm saying this as a scientist with data. You're treated like you're some kind of extremist. Even, and you lay out the arguments, and they're not. You can't answer. Let me give you just an example of how blatantly we can show, and this is elementary physics now. We can show that the rockets used in the Damascus nerve agent attack in 2013 could only travel 2 kilometers. Now, if it was true that they only can travel 2 kilometers, and this is a fact of physics, then it cannot be true that they were launched from Syrian government-controlled areas into Zamalta. It just cannot be true. It's just a fact of a child could read the map and see that this is not true. Yet, if you try to raise this as a point, which is central to the arguments that have been made, you get treated like you're some kind of nutcase. So I really think the problem is that when you talk about fake news, I don't like the whole thing. Not both, but the range of the political spectrum sees arguments as fake news depending on their preconceived political positions. So if you say something that someone who thinks of themselves as a progressive that they don't want to hear, you're dismissed without discussion. And the same is true on the right. And it's an incredibly frustrating situation. And I think this goes to the heart of Bruce's concerns about the Constitution, because nobody's listening. Nobody's thinking. It's just knee jerks from just different corners of the political matrix. And how can it be that you lose strength in the House of Representatives when you have a president who's been lying all the time? How can it be that people think that Biden lost the election? How can this be? This brings me back to Nazi Germany. I never thought I understood Nazi Germany until I saw what was going on here. So people will believe anything.
So I wanted, Bruce, can you jump in and put those 3 chemical attacks in a constitutional framework for us?
First of all, one of the reasons why the chemical weapon issue escaped scrutiny is because Congress had no oversight. But that's not unique. It was very early on concealed, but known that there really was no second torpedo attack on the Turner and the Maddox and the Turner Joy, which was utilized by Johnson to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed. It wasn't until years and years later. But before voting, did they have hearings? Was there really a second torpedo attack? Beside the fact that Johnson lied repeatedly about we weren't already helping the South Vietnamese infiltrate into the North and were undertaking covert actions there. I think Daniel Ellsberg recounts in one of his books that one of his first days, he had to tell 8 lies about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution for McNamara to promote to the press. So that's the reason why this escapes the scrutiny that it deserves. So you could testify. Congress doesn't hold any oversight hearings anymore that are worthy of anything. I would agree with you, Ted, that it's very difficult to be given the polarized nature of the public to get people to focus on, well, okay, what are the facts? Let's listen to all sides and then try to come up with what makes most sense. Well, that was epitomized, I think, in my illustration where Mitch McConnell tells Biden, you think I care what the facts are? Listen, I've already made my political calculation. I don't know how we get out of that disease. And I say I call it an epidemic that crosses the party lines. When you don't care anymore about an impartial effort to get facts. And of course, it's not going to be perfect because we're human beings. But there's a difference between trying to be impartial and neutral and looking at facts as dispassionately as possible and open and notoriously already knowing what you're going to say. You already have your press release before you even know what's transpired. How you can get the American public, back to I would consider a more rational, constitutional centered universe. Good question. I simply don't know how you can do that because at present the schools are not doing it. The cues that youngsters get in the social media are not doing it. I say when President Obama, and I pick him out because he's Harvard Law Review president. He's University of Chicago constitutional teacher. When he writes an 800-page book and he talks about his role as president and he makes one fleeting reference to the Constitution of very little significance, I said, my God, this is ridiculous. The Constitution has now disappeared from our discourse. Now, does that mean we give up? No. We need to try. I said, I've always thought that we need a training school for those who want to run for office. It's got to have real resources. But without that, by the time most members are already in office, they've already been bought by their campaign donors, the military industrial complex. They get there, they get wined and dined. Nancy Pelosi and McConnell have $800 million in leadership PAC money so that they can give them for the next campaigns. And it's very difficult for them to focus on anything, but okay, they're supposed to rubber stamp what the executive does and they'll get money from Pelosi or McConnell to run the next campaign. We got to get the youth before they enter politics to think in the right constitutional mode.
Yeah, but see, my problem, Bruce, is I agree with everything. I'm sorry.
I see Boyden Gray. Boyden, why don't you jump in here? We've talked about, and I want to do a whole salon on delegation doctrine, but when Bruce says Congress is not doing their job, how much of that comes down to standardless delegation, what lawyers call delegation doctrine? And maybe you could explain that to everyone in terms that non-lawyers could understand.
Well, I think it's at the heart of the problem that we've got. So it's very, very important. And I'm sorry to come in late, and to have missed what could have supported some of the things that I'm saying. But the key aspect of the Constitution was the division of labor, separation of powers between the Congress and the Judiciary. And the founding fathers were worried most about Congress going berserk. And so they had lots of protections What they didn't really anticipate was that Congress might go AWOL. And Congress has gone AWOL, and there are many explanations for that. Part of the problem is that for the regulatory agencies, they get captured by the industries that are supposed to be regulated, and they want to have more. And so the regulatory agencies take advantage whenever they can of any ambiguity that they can possibly conjure up to make up law and run with it. And it's become the situation now where the bureaucracies tell Congress what to do, not vice versa, which is a total upset of the founding fathers' vision. And the problem stems from the fact that Congress, beginning in the 30s, did this, gave away their legislative, their constitutional authority to the executive branch. Been doing it for, more than a century, and it's got to stop. And if we can stop it and force Congress to own up to what they're doing, let the bureaucracy have no power at all, or much, much less than they are now asserting, then I think we can right the ship. Because what we have now is a runaway bureaucracy being sort of driven by hanger-on, big special interests, big business, whether it's big tech or big this or big that, pharma, or whatever it is, in military-industrial complex. I could go through the whole thing. So could anybody on this call who's a lawyer. And we have a total imbalance. And I think that the Supreme Court now has 6 votes to rectify the situation, and they're going to do it. And when it first starts to happen, you're going to see the biggest explosion in the main media and the big tech, Facebook and whatnot. You'll see screams of anger and whatever, but it's got to happen. It will happen. And I think we will finally right the ship of state, because you cannot have separation of powers if the central power has gone AWOL.
Molly, go ahead, jump in.
Go ahead. Yeah.
You got to unmute yourself, Molly. Molly, you're on mute. Molly, Max, can you unmute Molly? She's talking, but we can't hear her.
Okay, I think I found the button. Okay, sorry. So I'm listening to this conversation, very much appreciate Bruce and John. And I'm thinking, how many lawyers are there in Congress who certainly should understand law and what the Constitution says about the way the government operates? And I have to wonder, if they don't, whether there's something not happening in the law schools where this would be a way to teach people what the Constitution, certainly the lawyers who run most of what happens, they write the laws, or at least they tell the staff who to write, what to write. But I'm struck by the absence or the contradiction between a Congress full of lawyers who don't know what the Constitution says about the way the government should operate.
Molly, that's a wonderful question. Let me answer. I have made repeated efforts at Harvard Law School, talking to Martha Minow, the dean. Hey, why don't we have a course? I'll come up there, Lou Fisher and others will teach on war powers, separation of powers. And they're all the Mandarin class up there. Remember, Obama is Harvard Law.
Right.
And he writes 800 pages. I don't know whether that is his memoir. And you remember, Molly, does he ever mention the Constitution?
Right.
No,
Right.
never. Because the law schools don't really teach separation of powers. There's a handful of cases, Youngstown, Sheet and Tube. But in large part because they're trade schools and you don't really make money and have clients, on separation of powers issues. That occasional big case comes. But also it's because the law schools typically are taught by professors whose entire experience in the executive branch. They clerk, they go serve in some executive assistant attorney general, this or that, and then they go back and teach, or they just go directly from the judiciary. They don't have any experience with Congress. The last member of the U.S. Supreme Court who actually spent time in Congress was Hugo Black, which is, almost 100 years ago. And so you're absolutely correct. The law schools do a terrible job. And when I've approached them with others several times, you need to do this. No, we really don't want to. We can't be critical of all the people. The law schools oftentimes have their professors go serve in the executive branch of one form or another. Occasionally they're different. Stephen Breyer did serve with Senator Kennedy's committee on, did some aviation reform, but that's by and large the exception. And that's why, because separation of powers is not part of the staple of law school experience.
Well, so then an effort to change that should include outreach to the law schools in as many different ways as possible to make the point that they need to teach lawyers what the Constitution says about the way the government ought to operate.
You're exactly right. I even wrote.
You don't have.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Bruce, let me just answer.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Boyd.
You don't have have no idea how difficult it is for a conservative lawyer to get tenure at an American law school. You have no idea. It's like trying to, I don't know what it's like trying to do. Climb the Himalayas, to climb Mount Everest 3 times a year. That's what it's like. So don't blame the law schools. I mean, don't blame conservatives for not having infiltrated the law school. The law schools have done their level best to keep conservatives out.
Yeah. And it's not only the law schools, Molly. I recently wrote an article with Lou Fisher, and it was on the Constitution and why the lawyers needed to get involved. And it pivoted off of some of the things I put in the Constitutional Restoration Project. This is for the American Bar Association Journal. You'd figure, okay, this is the National Journal for Lawyers, that they'd have an interest in. Nah, we don't cover that, but you can make donations to the ABA Journal. Really, it's not an issue worthy of our audience. This is incredible. And anyway, I can tell you reams about the American Bar Association Journal and the American Bar Association as well. That pays no attention whatsoever to any of these issues.
Pat Malloy, then Todd will do you next.
Yeah, John, thank you. And thank you all for this wonderful discussion. I wanted to come back to 2 points. The one that Boyden made about the Congress doesn't do adequate oversight of what these agencies are doing. And that's tied to the other problem that Bruce raised about the money. I worked up there for 15 years on a major committee. And it's quite different than when I was up there now. The money in the whole political process has really mushroomed over the last 30 years. And these guys have to spend so much of their time raising money that they don't do the oversight and the other jobs that they're elected to do, because they're spending so much of their time raising money to get reelected. And then to tie that to the leadership, when I was up there, committees had a lot of power, and at least in the Senate. That's all gravitated now up to the leadership in both houses because of the money that the leadership raises, that they then distribute to people who are elected by the people. So there's a money in the political system is really a huge part of our problem, I think.
Well, I wouldn't disagree, Pat. It is a problem, but it's not the sole problem. The vast majority of members, if you said, okay, you don't have to raise money all the time, you need to be reading more about the Constitution. They don't want to make decisions that are politically risky. It wasn't the donations that caused them to say, get furious. You don't make us vote on war. We don't want to do that. That's why Walter Jones was such a pariah, because he kept saying, our duty is to vote on war. So it's a combination of the distraction of money raising, but also they just feel, to be primaried is like a dirty word. So they want to do as little as possible so they have no issues that a rival can campaign against.
Right. So Todd, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, so I posted a question in the chat, but I'll offer another question instead, similar to it. But so as a Guantanamo defense attorney, and as a person who used to call myself a conservative up until the George W. Bush administration, I had to go back and look and see how in the world was I so wrong about people who call themselves conservatives. And on the Salon email list, I've had sort of a running debate with a couple of conservatives on what does conservative mean. And the problem I've had is when I run up, and let me say, Bruce is the only remaining conservative whom I have any respect for, because he upholds the Bill of Rights so valiantly, and Madisonianism, which I consider myself to be part of and supportive of. But when I became a Guantanamo defense attorney, and actually before that as a attorney with the Minnesota Secretary of State's office dealing with election issues, I saw the Republicans, self-professed conservatives, and even before that, as conservatives became so supportive of things like torture, immediately after 9/11, and on and on. And then as a Guantanamo defense attorney, we knew that if we went up against conservative judges, we were going to lose, no matter what constitutional arguments we were going to make, because they're all going to defer to the national security state. So I've lost the conservative judges and justices have lost their luster because they've always upheld whatever extremes the national security state wants to take. So perhaps people might want to discuss that. And judges like Judge Taylor, a liberal, he's the only person on the DC Circuit Court of Appeals whom we realized we could make a reasonable argument to, and he would listen to it. The conservatives like Kavanaugh, they were just completely out of the question of even thinking we could make a constitutional argument to them. Anyway, perhaps some comments on that might be.
Yeah, if I could respond, Todd, first, thank you for the kind words. I think that the problems we confront are more than just conservative liberal. I mean, remember, for example, Obama came in, okay, he had all the information about the torture, the extraordinary renditions, whatever. He didn't do anything, nothing. He said he was going to shut down Guantanamo. He didn't at all. He backed away from civilian trials. And if you read his memoir, he says, okay, yeah, I was driven by politics. There's only so much that I can do. And I don't think that we get a whole lot of progress by focusing on, well, the conservative liberal split. Yeah, we understand that that difference in philosophy can certainly affect votes. But on national security issues, of high moment, the war issues, that's all the courts, generally speaking.
And let me just add, I agree with that, Bruce. So I'm not trying to say it's only the Republicans, believe me. It's something that's infected us as a whole. I mean, we're manifest destiny, and I would argue that imperialism goes back when we landed on these shores as the spearhead of English imperialism and began our march across North America. But it took a high jump with Spanish-American War. But that's began under McKinley. It's easy to blame Wilson, but really the guy to blame is Theodore Roosevelt, who began this imperialist, global imperialism.
I call it the Faustian bargain, bargain. But also, Wilson also brought in this idea, I think, that was critical to separation of powers. And I think it explains, the delegation issue that Boyden highlighted so well. And that is, if you think, like Woodrow Wilson, that if you're really smart and your technologists have all the answers, why do you want to block the really smart people from saving the world? That because separation of powers requires you to go slow, right? You got to develop consensus. But once you develop this idea, well, now the really smart people who have all these high degrees are going to run things. Separation of powers just looks like a barnacle. We already have the answers. We don't need to debate anything because we're infallible. They didn't have papal infallibility, but they had political infallibility. And that, I think, continues on to this very day. Okay, the really smart people, they know how to solve everything, whether it's the global warming or whether it's saving the world for democracy or whatever. And therefore, it's called gridlock, when gridlock is, hey, we may get it wrong. Why don't we think about this more than once? It's a variety of things, but overall, the political culture has been degraded from the time of the founding. And it's not to say that there are many glaring failures, but compared to what we have today, at least it implanted a system where we could grow and develop and amend the Constitution, correct gross error. and proceed. Now we don't have any process at all. Whoever has the power just does what they want without any principle. The other guys get in power, they do the opposite.
Now, I see Walter Nolan. You want to jump in?
Historical note to add to what Borden and Bruce were saying about separation of powers and academic world as well. In 1972, I was chief counsel of a Senate Judiciary Committee subcommittee called, if you will, separation of powers. It no longer exists because the issue is not important, evidently. But anyway, what was going on at the time, we were having quite a fight with the Nixon administration, and this is a year and a half before Watergate hearings that the Senate put on over executive privilege and impoundment of funds. And so we were invited to the Harvard Law School forum to discuss executive privilege. And the academics it was like a novelty. They'd never heard of it, really. They sort of were aware of it. They didn't know there'd been this congressional struggle going on for almost a year and a half. And then the post-Watergate legislation that was enacted, the Budget and Impoundment Act. Impoundment was particularly put in there because of the fights over that. So as you said, all that's gone away. Nobody, that part of the post-Watergate legislation is most noticed by being ignored. And the whole idea of impoundment of funds, executive privilege, comes up every now and then. But again, as you said, in law schools, it is a trade school. You don't make any money doing constitutional law. And it's really kind of a nice novelty to discuss from time to time. It appeared to us, but it actually became a 3-year fight later. So that's just to try to say, to undergird what you were saying. This has been around for a while and been ignored for a while.
Yeah, if I could just add, that's a wonderful observation. Now, I had a professor I knew at the time who was a big critic of executive privilege, Raoul Berger. You may recall Raoul. But Raoul within the faculty, he was ostracized, because all the professors, they're Kennedy people and they're claiming privilege, Archibald Cox's and everybody. And that's where the privilege actually became most utilized. And Nixon obviously followed on, although he was a critic of it when he was in Congress and chastised Harry Truman for invoking privilege. But yeah, that's absolutely true. Harvard has gone along with all of this without any protest whatsoever, disappears from the curriculum.
See, Ed Hughes, you had a question about the relationship between the imperial presidency and the size of the defense budget. Is that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the question is actually has to do with the fact that the presidents wouldn't do any of this if they weren't given these massive defense budgets that allow them to spend money any way they want to. Waging wars is a very expensive proposition. And so the question is, why don't we attack the defense budget as a way of curtailing the presidential usurpation of power? Why not go after that? Why not convince Congress and support Congress people who are in favor of reducing the defense budget and candidates that are in favor of reducing the defense budget as a way of curbing the presidential usurpation of power? It seems to me that whenever candidates come forward that are in favor of doing that, they're labeled as being soft on whatever, ... right? And so they're banished to some far left extreme wing of the Democratic Party instead of being supported and say, yeah, that's the right way of going about this. Let's cut presidential usurpation of power by cutting the defense budget.
Well, that's a wonderful question, Ed. I think the answer is that the defense contractors are very skilled, and so they put all their plants in all the key districts in the entire country. So virtually every member's got jobs, and they got lobbyists and people who make political action committee contributions. And so even though they may say something, when it comes to actually voting on the defense budget, you'll find virtually no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. The military is very skilled. They'll come up to every congressman and say, these are how many jobs we're providing in your district. You know, this is how much our political action committee funds come in. So there isn't any debate, and there's virtually no oversight. Right now, as we speak, Ed, the Pentagon has never, ever passed an audit, never once. So Congress continues to fund at lavish amounts money in an endeavor that can't be audited. Now, you as a business person, if someone said you should consider investing in a company that can't be audited, you'd laugh at them. Say, wait a minute, they need to audit first. Yet that's how the Congress operates. And that's why there virtually is no debate over the size of the defense budget. You know, they argue a little bit about $1 billion here or there, whether the names of the forts ought to be changed away from Confederate generals or otherwise. But when it comes to the money and the jobs, they're all singing from the same page.
John, can I?
Yeah,
John,
Pat.
may I?
Sure. Yeah. Mark's had his hand up, Pat, and then you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I haven't been able to raise it. I want to take up something Bruce mentioned earlier. There seems to be a theme in something that's underlying much of what he said this evening. Again, I'm no lawyer, I'm no politician, but Bruce, you mentioned that you had the hairs on your neck stood up when you heard people saying that congressmen could make people disappear. And what I was thinking is I'd like to ask the converse to that. I remember when I was in junior high, my father had me read the Constitution with him. He was a lawyer, I'm not. And I remember the idea of a plebiscite, which was mentioned somewhere in the Constitution and was there to grant a final counterweight against the three branches of government should they misbehave. Is there any way to use, for example, the power of a plebiscite to, let's say, if, for example, let's say somebody runs for office and lies, could we have capital punishment on a person in Congress for lying in the process of seeking office? Or is there any way that we can just give a counterweight to the misbehavior of Congress and the executive branch?
First of all, Mark, it's a wonderful question, but the framers did not endorse a plebiscite as part of our constitutional framework. Indeed, when it came to the presidency, they said no. They had suspicion of what you might call direct democracy, and so that's why we have
the House of
Representatives system.
Right, that's the reason the House of Representatives was there for us rabble.
Well, you're right, and the Senate was to be the cooling dish, and then the president was to be elected by platonic guardian, something like that, and the judiciary was there to check. So there isn't anything in our constitutional system that authorizes a plebiscite. Now, you could obviously amend the Constitution. I don't know whether there have been proposed amendments to have the president elected directly rather than electoral votes. They haven't passed or gone far. Maybe they never will. But I think that the problem we confront is far deeper even than those mechanics. The political culture was compromised when the Faustian bargain was made over a century ago. Our country is not about liberty anymore and due process. It's about power, projecting how great we are and ruling the world. And that's how we envision ourselves. And most people raised thinking, yeah, we're number one. We're the chosen people. We're exceptional. And when you have to rule the world, it's virtually impossible to maintain separation of powers. You need unity of command, which means you need a Julius Caesar to run things at the top. And that's why whether you have Napoleonic personalities or more recessive genes, the White House stays on top of all the national security things steadily, and Congress is reduced to an ink blot.
Well, that clarifies something. My recollection was incorrect. So plebiscite is not in the Constitution itself. And
No.
Certainly nobody in the executive branch or legislature, for that matter, the courts, would ever allow a plebiscite to be voted on without, they wouldn't want it. It's not in their interests.
Well, right. You'd have to force it. The public would have to demand an amendment to the Constitution to put that in. John, it's 8:22, so I've got to.
Bruce has got a hard stop at at 8:30, right?
I have
So
one more
Pat, go,
question.
Yeah,
jump in.
if you give me about 5 more minutes, I should have at least a few minutes before I jump
okay.
on this other deal. So if I could do 5 more minutes and then, get me on to the other,
Okay.
obligation I have. Yeah.
Can
Go ahead.
I ask a key question that I think will help this discussion? I think the people don't want us in all these wars. I think our citizens don't want us in all these wars. Secondly, I think the political system in the country is beginning to, as the fact that we don't have any money on infrastructure and all these other things. Now we're going to, but they know that this has been really hurting the country, spending all these money in foreign wars. Now, PBS News did a big 10 minutes tonight on the veterans who all get sick from the garbage dumps that are burned in these foreign countries like Afghanistan and others. And that's going to be an additional cost. So I was amazed to see that on PBS tonight. Earlier this week, PBS spent 10 minutes with the foreign minister of Taiwan about the Chinese increasing pressure on whether Taiwan is going to be taken over by China. This is, and then you have our current policy toward Taiwan, whether we defend it or not with our own people, is called strategic ambiguity. That means we kind of leave it up in the air. And then the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass, has said that we need to move to strategic clarity, meaning that we'll defend Taiwan if they get attacked by the Chinese. This is the perfect moment to drive this issue that Congress needs to make these kinds of decisions. These can't be left to the executive branch. This is the right time to push this into the Congress and say, we don't want any commitment to use our people to defend Taiwan unless Congress authorizes it. Can't be left to the executive branch. I think it's the right time to push this issue.
Yeah, well, we're trying, Pat, all I can say. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't disagree with anything you've said. The evidence is so overwhelming. But I apologize. I really have to go now.
Okay.
Let me compliment everybody who's participated. All the questions were wonderful. They're all better than the answers, I'm sure. But I hope we can do something along these same lines, because the issue is certainly not going away. And John, but I do have to go to this next meeting.
Okay.
And I'm grateful
Good.
for the indulgence.
Well, thank
A
you,
lot.
Bruce.
Okay.
Congratulations. Very, very well done.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
We will
All right.
end. All right. Thank
Okay.
you.